Welcome back. What you are about to hear is based on a terrifying viral story from an office worker in Singapore. Imagine this. You are working late, the last person in the building. Everything is strangely quiet. You pass by the conference room, and through the glass wall, you see it. A small child, standing by the window. She is holding a dead cat, and in the reflection, you see the cat's eyes staring back at her. This is the story of If Glass Could Remember. Hit subscribe, because the full and horrifying explanation is right at the end. Don't look away. Celeste Ong operated on a wavelength of pure, unfiltered logic. Her world was not one of shades and shadows, but of metrics, quarterly reviews, and the quantifiable data of human resources. She was a senior manager at 32, heading the HR division for the new regional hub. And she had earned her position by being pragmatic, sharp, and entirely unsentimental. She didn't just not believe in ghosts, she found the very concept to be a failure of critical thinking, a sloppy categorization of mundane phenomena, a draft of cold air, the settling of a new building, tricks of the light. Superstition, in her mind, was simply a virus of the inefficient brain, and she had no bandwidth for it. Her current project was the definition of the tangible, establishing the 27th floor office of the new Kratos Tower. The elevator doors opened with a smooth, synthesized chime, and Celeste stepped out onto the polished grey laminate. The smell hit her first, a sterile cocktail of new carpet adhesive, latex paint, and the faint, metallic tang of the industrial-grade air conditioning. It was the smell of potential, of a budget correctly allocated. This was her domain. The 27th floor was a vast, open-plan space, currently a ghost town of empty ergonomic chairs and dark monitor screens. The design was aggressively modern, corporate logic made manifest. There were no warm woods or soft fabrics, only glass, brushed steel, and acoustic ceiling tiles. The dominant feature was the light. Rows upon rows of long white LED panels were set flush into the ceiling, casting a brilliant, shadowless glare over everything. It wasn't sunlight. It was a clinical, blue-white light that hummed at a frequency just below conscious hearing. It was the kind of light that keeps you awake, alert, and productive, even if it makes your eyes ache by 3 p.m. Celeste's heels, sensible, black, 2-inch, clicked sharply on the floor. The sound was the only immediate punctuation in the vast quiet. It was 7:45 a.m. The main staff wouldn't arrive for another hour. The new hires not until 10. She was, as always, early. She walked the perimeter. The entire outer wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a stunning panoramic view of the city waking up below. But Celeste wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at the glass itself. It was reflective, in the stark morning light. The office interior was perfectly mirrored on its surface. As she walked, a dozen Celestes, crisp in her white silk blouse and grey pencil skirt, walked with her, a silent, efficient army of reflections. She noted a smudge near the fire exit and made a mental note to speak to the new cleaning service. The acoustics of the new space were unforgiving. Every sound was amplified, bouncing cleanly off the hard surfaces. The distant thump of the industrial printer warming up echoed from the copy room. The low, omnipresent hiss of the ventilation system felt as loud as a whisper. It was the sound of a vacuum, an emptiness waiting to be filled by the structured chaos of the workday. Phones ringing, keyboards clattering, the mandated collaborative chatter. For now, it was a sterile canyon of sound. And her footsteps were the only sign of life. She arrived at her own designated workstation, a corner cubicle with a slightly better view. If one were inclined to look at it, her laptop was already docked. She booted it up, the familiar Windows chime sounding jarringly loud. Her agenda for the day was precise. Finalize onboarding schedules, review the new flexible benefits platform, conduct 9:00 a.m. check-in with the IT integration team, personally greet the new hires. It was a list. It was concrete. It was manageable. She was deep into the benefits platform, cross-referencing vendor codes, when a flicker of movement registered in her peripheral vision, one of the reflections in the glass partition separating her from the main floor. She looked up. A young woman was standing by the central coffee station, wiping down the stainless steel counter with a microfiber cloth. Celeste frowned. She hadn't heard the elevator. She hadn't heard any footsteps. The woman turned, as if sensing the gaze, and offered a small, polite smile. She was slight, dressed in a simple, dark-coloured cardigan and skirt. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat, functional bun. "Good morning, Ms. Ong," the woman said. Her voice was soft, barely rising above the hum of the air conditioning. Celeste recognized her instantly. "Sarah Lamb, you're in early." Sarah Lamb was the new administrative assistant. Assigned to the HR and operations floor, she had been hired 2 weeks prior. During the final setup phase, her resume had been impeccable, her references stellar. In the brief time Celeste had known her, Sarah Lamb had proven to be the literal definition of the perfect employee. Quiet, preternaturally helpful, and always early. She was the first one in, the last one out. And she moved through the office with an unsettling lack of friction. "I wanted to make sure the coffee machine was calibrated before the team arrived." "Ms. Ong," Sarah Lamb said. She held up a small, freshly brewed cup. "I brought you one. Black. 1 sugar." Celeste paused. She hadn't told Sarah Lamb how she took her coffee. She must have observed it during one of the meetings. Efficient, Celeste thought. Impressed. She filed the data point under proactive employee behavior. "Thank you, Sarah Lamb. That's very thoughtful." Celeste accepted the ceramic cup. It was warm, anchoring. She took a sip. It was perfect. "The IT team is already in the server room," Sarah Lamb reported softly, already turning back to her task of organizing the sugar packets. "They said the new firewall is causing a slight latency issue, but it should be resolved by 9:30. "Good," Celeste said, nodding. "I was about to call them. No need. I already forwarded their status email to your inbox." Sarah Lamb finished her task and gave the counter one final, satisfied wipe. She moved with a liquid economy of motion, no wasted steps, no fumbled items. She was a silent, helpful presence, a human extension of the office's own sterile efficiency. She was, in Celeste's professional opinion, the best hire she had made this quarter. "Will you need the boardroom projector for the 10 o'clock orientation, Ms. Ong?" "Yes, please ensure it's synced with the main presentation laptop. I've already done it," Sarah Lamb said with her small, persistent smile. "And I've placed bottled water and welcome packets at each seat." Celeste Ong, the woman of logic, the skeptic, the high-functioning manager, took another sip of her coffee. She looked at Sarah Lamb, this quiet, unassuming, hyper-competent assistant. Then she looked back at her monitor, at the rows of data and the checklist that governed her day. Everything was in order. Everything was rational. The white lights buzzed overhead. The glass reflected her own composed image. And the quiet, helpful Sarah Lamb was already moving silently down the corridor, a shadow in the bright, clinical light, disappearing around the corner toward the supply room without making a sound. Celeste turned back to her work, the click of her own keyboard beginning to fill the echoing void. It was just another workday. All right, let's build the atmosphere. This chapter is all about the slow burn, the sensory details that are just wrong enough to ignore, but just right enough to terrify. Here is the narrative, following your structure. Chapter 3, First Uncanny Signs. The workday had been a special kind of hell, one reserved for spreadsheet errors and endless circular meetings. Sarah Lamb didn't just walk into her apartment, she spilled into it, a wave of exhaustion held together by a fading caffeine buzz. She kicked off her shoes, the thud on the parquet floor the only sound in the apartment. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like a held breath. She went through the motions, keys in the bowl, bag on the chair. She microwaved leftover noodles that tasted like cardboard and salt, eating them straight from the container while leaning against the counter. Her apartment was on the 14th floor. Its main selling point had been the floor-to-ceiling sliding glass door that led to a narrow balcony, offering a sprawling, glittering view of the city. Tonight, the city lights felt accusatory, like a million tiny eyes watching her. She showered, the hot water stinging her skin, and changed into an old t-shirt. All she wanted was the oblivion of sleep. She flicked off the main lights, leaving only the dim, amber glow of her bedside lamp. The apartment was immediately plunged into a world of sharp shadows and deep, ambiguous pools of darkness. She flopped onto the bed, the mattress sighing under her weight. The first hint that the night was turning sour was a sound. It was a faint scratching, like a single, sharp fingernail being drawn slowly across the drywall in the hallway just outside her apartment door. Scrap! She froze, listening. The sound stopped. Her building was old, poorly insulated. It was, she told herself, just Mrs. Goha's miniature poodle from 14B. That dog was a nervous wreck, always clawing at the door when its owner left. It was an annoying, mundane sound. She sighed, pulling the covers up to her chin, dismissing it. But as she settled, her subconscious registered what her tired brain refused to. The sound hadn't been low to the ground, where a dog would be. It had been high, shoulder height. It was a small, cold detail, but her exhaustion provided a convenient blanket, smothering the nascent flicker of fear. Old buildings groan. That's all it was. She turned onto her side, facing the dark corner of her room, and shut her eyes. The silence rushed back in, heavier this time. But it wasn't empty. It was pricked by a new sensation, a smell. It was faint, but unmistakable, coppery and damp, with an underlying note of something like stagnant water. It was the smell of old pennies and wet soil. Sarah Lamb's eyes opened. She sniffed the air, sitting up slightly. "Did I leave the kitchen trash?" she mumbled. No. She'd taken it out this morning. Maybe a pipe had backed up in the bathroom. She listened. No drip, no gurgle. She sniffed again. The smell was gone, replaced by the faint, familiar scent of her own lavender detergent on the sheets. It must have been the city air. She rationalized. A gust from the alley dumpsters or the riverfront 3 blocks over. She'd heard 100 such phantom smells in the 2 years she'd lived here. It was nothing. And yet, the smell hadn't been garbage. It had been organic, metallic. It was the smell of a wound. Her stomach gave a small, uncomfortable lurch, a silent warning that she promptly ignored. She was just tired. She needed sleep. She forced her eyes shut again. 10 minutes passed. She was hovering in that awful, frustrating grey space between awareness and sleep. Her thoughts were becoming disjointed, blurring at the edges. Need to email accounting. That scratching sound, don't stop it. She rolled onto her back, her gaze falling lazily on the great glass door. The city lights were a smear of neon and white. She could see her own reflection faintly superimposed over the skyline. A dark shape, a pale face, a tangle of hair on the pillow. She blinked. For one crystalline, impossible second, her reflection didn't blink with her. It just stared, the Sarah Lamb in the glass. The faint, ghostly silhouette held her gaze. Her eyes, in the reflection, were not half-lidded with sleep. They were wide, open, staring at her. Sarah Lamb's heart hammered once, a painful thump against her ribs. She sat bolt upright, gasping. Her reflection sat up with her, perfectly mimicking the movement. It was just her, tired, rumpled, with wide, terrified eyes. Just her. "Jesus, Sarah," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Get a grip." It was a hypnagogic hallucination, a trick of the light and an overtired brain. It was common. People saw things all the time when they were falling asleep. She laughed, a short, sharp, unconvincing sound. She rubbed her eyes so hard she saw stars. It was a warning, a clear sign she was running on fumes. She had to sleep. That's all this was, a physical symptom of exhaustion. But the audience, the universe, the entity that watches all such stories, knew better. The reflections are the first to know. They are the threshold, and hers had just shown her that something else was looking through her eyes. She refused to look at the glass again. She turned away, facing the solid, comforting plaster of her bedroom wall, and squeezed her eyes shut. Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. The mantra looped, a desperate prayer, and finally, the heavy, viscous pull of sleep began to win. Her breathing deepened. The tension eased from her shoulders. Her thoughts dissolved from words into simple, dark shapes. She was falling. She drifted. The room grew cold. It wasn't a draft. It was a penetrating, damp cold that settled on her skin, right through the duvet. It was the cold of a deep cellar, a refrigeration unit. Her half-conscious mind registered the change. Building maintenance, tweaking the AC, she thought, her brain supplying the last dregs of logic. She tried to pull the blanket tighter, but her limbs were heavy, glued down by the encroaching sleep. It was just a draft, but this cold didn't move. It settled. It was a weight. It was a presence. Sleep was no longer an escape. It was the trap. And then, in the murky depths of her slumber, she heard it again. Schluck. Schluck. It was not the dry scratching from the hallway. This was wet, slow, the sound of a bare, wet palm being pressed flat against a pane of glass and then dragged down. Her mind, desperate for oblivion, tried to file it away. Rain. It's starting to rain. The first drops hitting the window, but there was no pitter-patter, only that single, deliberate, sliding sound, schluck. Her eyes, weighted with a paralysis that felt both physical and chemical, peeled open. She was no longer facing the wall. Sometime in her sleep, she had turned. She was facing the glass door. The city was gone, the millions of lights, the glittering skyline. All of it was obscured, blacked out, not by a curtain, but by shapes, a row of them. Her breathing stopped. This was the moment, the shift from a narrative voice to a whispered, internal scream. There, barely a few feet away, the cold in the room was emanating from the glass. Pressed against the other side of the 14th floor window was a line of silent observers. They were not people. They were outlines, pressed so hard against the glass that their features were flattened into grotesque, genderless masks of pale, waxy flesh. Their hair, matted, stringy, and drenched, was plastered to their skulls and to the glass, framing their faces in black, dripping clumps. Sarah Lamb's mind tried to reject it. A dream. This is a dream, a night terror. But she could smell it. The smell was back, flooding the room, the metallic, coppery reek of old blood. And their hands, oh God, their hands. They were splayed on the glass, dozens of them, pale and wrinkled from water. They were pressed flat, the fingers spread wide, and where their palms and fingers touched, they were leaving smears. Smears of red, thick, dark, arterial red that clung to the glass. Smudging and running in lazy, greasy tracks down the pane. One of them, the one directly in front of her, moved. It didn't turn its head. Its eyes, which she couldn't quite see, didn't open. It just pressed harder. Its mouth, a pale, bloodless gash in the waxy face, slowly opened. It released a silent, vaporous breath against the glass, fogging a perfect, round circle. Sarah Lamb couldn't scream. Her throat was locked. The paralysis was absolute. She was a prisoner in her own bed, a spectator to her own haunting. This wasn't a warning. This was a claiming. The glass wasn't a barrier to keep them out. It was a stage, and they were here to perform. The reflections. She finally understood. Don't lie. They just show you what's already arrived. The grand opening for the new shop was suffocating. It wasn't just the humid afternoon air, thick with the press of hopeful relatives and the drone of the monks' monotone chanting. It was the red. The shop was draped in it. Red banners, red ribbons on the flower baskets. Even the lacquer on the new shelves seemed to bleed at the edges. And then there was the smoke. At the center of the room, the offering table, a massive, temporary structure of dark, heavy wood, was straining under the weight of the appeasement. A whole roasted pig, its skin glistening, pyramids of waxed skin fruit, and front and center, a massive brass censer struggling to contain a bundle of thick, rough juniper incense sticks. The incense smoke didn't rise. It hadn't for the last 10 minutes. While the monk chanted and her aunt, the new owner, bowed her head in prayer, Anne watched the smoke. It spilled over the lip of the censer like a sluggish liquid, pooling on the tabletop and creeping downward, coiling around the table's legs. It was too thick, too grey, and it carried an acrid, metallic tang, cutting sharply through the scent of sandalwood. It smelled like old rust, like iron, and nudged her cousin. Bao, does that smoke smell off to you? Bao fanned his face, eyes fixed on his phone. It's incense, and it all stinks. Can't wait for the food part. He didn't even look up. Anne looked back at the table. The smell was getting stronger. Her aunt, beaming, stepped forward to light a final smaller set of joss sticks. She bowed deeply, 3 times. May our new venture be prosperous, she prayed, her voice ringing with optimism. May we be protected from misfortune and... The table wobbled. It was small, a tiny shudder, a single, perfect orange, perched on the edge of a stack, broke free. It dropped onto the tabletop, bounced once, and then began a slow, deliberate roll toward the edge. It tracked a perfectly straight line, as if pushed by an unseen hand. It rolled past the pig, past the censer, and toppled off the edge, landing on the tile floor with a dull, wet thud. The chanting stopped. Anne's aunt stared at the fruit, her smile frozen. The floor must be uneven, Bao muttered, finally looking up. Cheap contractor. Yes, just the floor, her aunt said, laughing a high, sharp laugh that didn't sound like her. It's nothing. She nudged the orange back under the table with her foot, trying to hide it. She turned back to the monk, clapping her hands to restart the ceremony. Please, master, continue. But Anne's eyes were locked on the table. The floor wasn't uneven. She had helped set up the table herself. It was rock solid, and the smell was worse now. That sharp, coppery tang was overwhelming, so thick in her throat she could almost taste it. It was the smell of metallic blood. The monk began his chant again, faster this time, his voice wavering. He knew it too. This was a failed appeasement. The aunt bowed again, a jerky, desperate motion. We welcome the spirits, she said, her voice too loud. A sound of breaking glass cut her off. One of the small, delicate teacups on the altar, filled to the brim, had just cracked. A perfect fissure ran from top to bottom. Dark tea bled onto the white offering cloth. It's the heat, Bao insisted, standing up now, his own voice tight. The hot tea, the cold cup. But Anne was watching the pig. A bead of greasy condensation on its flank was trembling, vibrating. It wasn't the air conditioning, it wasn't the floor. It's rejecting the offer, and whispered, the words out of her mouth before she could stop them. What? Her aunt hissed, turning on her. And don't you dare say such things. Not today. The table. And pointed, her hand shaking. The table shook again. It wasn't a wobble. It was a shove. A single, violent, impossible push from an unseen force. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The heavy table, laden with offerings, jumped backward half a foot. The spell of denial was broken. The fruit pyramids collapsed. Oranges, dragon fruits, and pomelos cascaded onto the floor, scattering in all directions as if a bomb had gone off. The roasted pig slid from its platter, hitting the tile with a sickening heavy smack. The sensor, too heavy to fall, was rammed into the wall, disgorging a cloud of choking, iron-scented smoke that filled the room. It was a rejection, a symbolic act of pure, unfiltered spite. There was screaming. Bao grabbed Anne's arm. Her aunt stood frozen, her face a mask of pale, abject terror, but no one else was moving. Anne's eyes scanned the room through the sudden, dark haze. The guests were still there. The monk was still there, but they were all frozen, like figures in a photograph. Bao's hand on her arm was a dead weight. Her aunt's mouth was open in a silent scream. They hadn't just not noticed the final, violent push. They hadn't experienced it. Only Anne had. The red banners on the wall seemed to darken to the colour of a fresh wound. The incense smoke, that choking, bloody smoke, crawled from the fallen censer and wrapped around her ankles like a living thing. The room was silent. The ritual was interrupted, and whatever they had invited, whatever they had failed to appease, was now in the room with her, and only her. The pale, watery light of dawn did nothing to warm the Arctic chill of Suite 1308. Celeste hadn't slept. She was hunched over the sleek, modern desk, her laptop open, her smartphone beside it, and the hotel's smart tablet streaming the security feed. She was a woman of the 21st century. She believed in data, in pixels, in timestamps. What she didn't believe in was the impossible, but the impossible was currently making a very strong case for itself. Her skin was clammy, her mind a frantic hamster wheel of cold disbelief. She was afraid. Yes, a deep, primal fear was settled in her stomach like a block of ice. But she was also angry. Angry at the trick her mind was playing on her. Angry at the evidence that refused to add up. "Okay," she muttered, her voice a dry rasp. "Logic. Start with logic." First, the photos. She'd ripped her phone from her pocket, her fingers trembling so badly she'd barely managed to unlock it. She had mashed the shutter icon, taking half a dozen pictures of the window. She opened her gallery. The first photo, black. The second, black. The third, a blur of absolute digital nothingness. The rest, black, black, black. Not dark, not out of focus. They were perfect, corrupted voids. It was as if she had taken photos of the inside of her pocket, but she knew she had been pointing the lens straight at the window, straight at the hand. "Corrupted file," she whispered, trying the words out. A glitch, a sensor malfunction, the cold. Maybe the cold messed with the camera. It sounded weak. It sounded pathetic. Her $1,000 smartphone, defeated by a cold draft? She turned her attention to the laptop, where she'd managed to access the hotel's security portal for the hallway outside her door. She hadn't seen anything, but the sound, that wet, scraping sound, had come from the hall first. She found the timestamp from last night. There she was, a grainy, night vision version of herself, opening the door, peering out. She watched herself close the door, the heavy thud, barely audible on the feed. Then, the moments after, she rewound, playing it again. She was looking for, what? A shadow? A flicker? She found it. Not a shadow, but a gap. She watched the timestamp in the corner of the screen. 03:14:10, 03:14:11, 03:14:12. Her on-screen self was standing by the door, listening. 03:14:13. The feed hitched. A single frame of static, like a digital sneeze. 03:14:51. 03:14. She slammed her finger on the mousepad, pausing the video. She scrubbed back and forth. It was gone. From 03:14 to 03:14:50. 37 seconds, wiped clean, a digital black hole. perfectly timed to the exact moment the scraping had started, the exact moment the cold had slammed into the room. Maintenance loop, she rationalized, her heart hammering. The system reboots, it purges data. It's a server error. But her tech-savvy brain was already screaming at her. Security systems don't just lose 37 seconds. They are built on redundancy. They have backups, unless something, or someone, with administrative access had deliberately surgically removed that slice of time, or unless something else had simply eaten it. Her eyes drifted, inevitably, to the window, the source of it all. The sun was hitting it now, and the condensation was gone. The glass was clear, revealing the grey, indifferent cityscape beyond. She felt a bizarre wave of relief. It was gone. It was just a nightmare. Condensation, a shadow, a power flicker. She had terrified herself over nothing. She walked towards it, needing to touch the glass to confirm its solidity. She reached out, her fingers just inches from the pane, and she froze. The light was hitting the glass at a sharp angle, and where the condensation had been, there was now a residue. Faint, oily smears. They were undeniable, and they were in the perfect, splayed shape of a human hand. Small, slender fingers, pressed flat. Her denial was a fortress, and this was the cannonball that shattered its gates. She could still explain this. A previous guest, a child, a cleaner who missed a spot. She grabbed a tissue from the box on the nightstand, dampened it with a splash of bottled water, and scrubbed at the outside of the glass. The smear remained, mocking her. Her blood ran cold. She slowly, mechanically, rubbed the tissue on the inside of the glass. The oily print smeared, then vanished, leaving a clean, wet streak. A long, shuddering breath escaped her. It came out as a whimper. The handprints were on the inside of the glass. The words hung in the air. A death sentence for her sanity. There was no way. The window was sealed. It was a solid, double-paned, climate-controlled unit. It hadn't been opened in decades. The realization had barely settled before the room answered. It began not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, subsonic thrum that vibrated in her bones. The lights in the room didn't flicker. They popped, one by one. The bulbs in the ceiling lamps and the bedside fixtures exploded in a shower of tiny, sharp particles, plunging the suite into a gloomy twilight. Only the electronics remained. Her laptop screen, which had been showing the security feed, dissolved into a screaming, chaotic waterfall of static. It was not the gentle snow of a bad signal. This was a violent, angry, digital blizzard. A piercing, high-frequency shriek erupted from the laptop speakers, a sound like a modem dialing into hell, loud enough to make her clap her hands over her ears. Then, her phone. It lit up on the desk, its screen glowing an evil, ozone blue. The black, corrupted photos she had taken began to cycle, one after another, faster and faster like a strobe light. But they weren't black anymore. In the digital noise of each corrupted file, a shape was emerging, a distortion in the pixels. She stumbled closer, mesmerized by the horror. It was a face, a pale, elongated face, its features twisted in a rictus of agony. The mouth was open, a black, howling void. The eyes were just sockets, pits of deeper static. The static from the laptop speakers deepened, modulating. The shriek was joined by 1,000 dry, whispering voices, all speaking at once, overlapping, incomprehensible. Get out. Stay. Let me in. It's cold. The entity was here. It wasn't just in the room. It was in the tech. It had infected her data, her proof, her connection to the outside world. From the roaring static of the laptop screen, something began to push through. It wasn't a hand, not a physical one. It was a construct of pure, glitching energy, a disjointed, buzzing, 2D rendered nightmare that began to stretch from the flat plane of the screen into the three-dimensional space of the room. Its fingers were long, crackling with blue-white electricity, elongating impossibly. Celeste scrambled backward, her heel catching on the leg of the desk chair. She fell hard, crashing to the carpet, crab-walking away, her mind unable to process the visual, auditory, and sensory assault. The static hand lunged. It didn't go for her. It shot across the desk with impossible speed and smashed down onto her smartphone. The screen didn't just crack, it exploded. The batteries shot out of the casing, sparking, and the phone went dead. The cycling, screaming face was gone. The whispers from the laptop rose to a deafening roar. The face on the screen was now pressed against the virtual barrier, the pixels of its cheeks and forehead distorting as if a real, solid object were trying to break through the LCD display. Crack! The sound was like a gunshot. She flinched, looking at the window, the glass, the solid, sealed glass, had a fracture running from top to bottom, originating from the very spot where the handprints had been. A bitter, unnatural cold poured into the room, visible as a pluming white mist. And from the handprints, a thick, black, oily substance began to weep, dripping down the pane like engine grease. She was trapped. Her proof was destroyed. Her phone was dead. The door was yards away, and the thing on the desk was between her and it. She was powerless. She was endangered. The laptop itself lifted off the desk, hovering a foot in there, held aloft by the crackling, unstable energy. The static face turned, tracking her. It drifted towards her, the power cord ripping from the wall in a shower of sparks. It stopped, inches from her face. She could feel the static on her skin, making the hair on her arms stand on end. She could smell the ozone, the scent of burnt plastic. This was it, the full, terrifying manifestation. It wasn't a ghost. It was a virus with a body, a demon in the machine. It had controlled the lights, the data, the very glass of the building, and now it was here. She was staring into the face of the impossible. She lay on the floor, gasping, surrounded by the smoking wreckage of her modern world. The entity has proven its point. There is no file to upload, no video to share, no data to save you. When the very technology you trust becomes the weapon used against you, where do you turn? What would you do if you were trapped, with no signal and no way out? Let me know your escape plan in the comments below. And if you want to see what happens next in this technological nightmare, do not forget to subscribe and click that notification bell. You won't want to miss the finale. That's the official term. Kabil was missing. He'd missed his 3:00 a.m. check-in, then his 4:00 a.m. By 5:00 a.m., the morning supervisor, Rena, was calling his phone, getting nothing but voicemail. By 6:00 a.m., she was calling me, panic in her voice. I was the project manager, the one who had insisted on hiring a dedicated night patrol for the suites after the first wave of incidents. I was at the security hub by 7:15 a.m., sipping watery coffee from a styrofoam cup, my eyes burning. Just find him. Rena was pleading with the building manager, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He probably just walked off the job. The manager muttered, "Find the footage, we'll dock his pay." So I sat down. I rewound the digital archives. I knew Kabil's route: East Wing corridor, timestamp 2:30 a.m., West Wing, 2:45 a.m., service elevator check, 2:50 a.m. Then, the 14th floor main hallway, the problem corridor. I found the feed, 14L corridor main. The timestamp read 02:53:11 a.m. The quality was what you'd expect, grainy, overexposed infrared. Kabil appeared from the left, a solid, unassuming man. He was doing his job. He had his logbook in hand, walking at a steady pace. You could see the slight reverb of his footsteps in the camera's cheap microphone. A soft, squeaking sound from his rubber-soled shoes. He walked past suite 1408, past 1410. He paused at 1412, the one with the faulty magnetic lock. and jiggled the handle. Secure. He made a note in his logbook. He continued walking. He was approaching the exact middle of the hallway, a long, featureless expanse of beige wallpaper and flat, inset lighting. There was nothing there, no door, no fire alarm, no intersecting corridor, just a wall. At 02:54:19 a.m., he stopped. He didn't turn. He didn't look around. He just stopped. He stood there for a full, silent 3 seconds. On the recording, I could see him tilt his head, as if listening to a sound the microphone couldn't catch. Then, at 02:54:22 a.m., he took a step, not forward, not backward. He took a step left. He turned 90 degrees and faced the wall. He raised his hand, not in fear, not to protect himself. He raised it like he was about to knock on a door, but he never made contact. At 02:54:25 a.m., the feed stuttered, a single frame of grey static, the kind that screams of digital interference. The timestamp froze for 37 seconds. At 02:55:02 a.m., the image snapped back. The hallway was empty. Kabul was gone. I rewound the feed. I played it again. I watched it 5, 10, 20 times. The camera didn't glitch. Time glitched. He didn't run. He wasn't dragged. He didn't fall. He walked toward the wall. The feed cut. The feed returned. He was gone. I got up from the chair and walked to the 14th floor. The building was waking up. I could hear room service carts rattling miles away. I stood in the hallway, the beige wallpaper mocking me with its blandness. I stood in the exact spot. I looked at the wall. I touched it. It was solid. It was plasterboard over a steel frame. I knocked on it. A dull, empty thud. Narrator, lower voice, long breath on the last sentence. Just smooth drywall. I didn't pack. I didn't write a letter of resignation. I didn't even log out of the security terminal. I left the CCTV feed of the empty hallway playing on a loop. I stood up, walked out of the security office, past a baffled Rena, and into the main lobby. The morning sun was streaming through the atrium glass, catching dust motes that danced like tiny, careless spirits. A woman was laughing into her phone by the concierge desk. The dissonance was a physical blow. The world was normal. My hands were shaking. I wasn't cold, but my teeth were chattering so violently I had to bite down on my tongue, tasting the metallic tang of blood. I walked through the automatic sliding glass doors, and the humid morning air hit me like a blanket. It didn't help. The cold was inside. I didn't take the company car. I took my own. I got in, locked the doors, and sat for a full minute, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. The only thought in my head was a single repeating word: wall, 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 wall. I drove. I didn't know where. I just drove. I got on the expressway and pushed the car to 90, then 100, weaving through morning traffic. The horns blaring at me were the only sounds that proved I was still here, that I was solid. The entity in that place, it didn't just haunt. It edited. It deleted. Kabil didn't die. He was archived. I drove until the gaslight came on. I pulled into a rest stop 3 hours out of the city. My knuckles white on the wheel. I stumbled into the greasy convenience store, bought a bottle of water, and splashed it on my face in the filthy bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were wide, the pupils dilated, my skin a pale, clammy grey. I looked like a man who had seen a ghost, a pathetic, useless cliché. I had seen worse. I had seen a man become a file not found. I abandoned the project. I abandoned the job. I abandoned my apartment lease. I left it all. I sent a single, anonymous email to a journalist I knew, a hot tip about a cover-up at the hotel, about a missing employee named Kabil. I attached the MP4 file of the 37-second glitch. I hit send from a public library computer and walked away. It was never about the money or the job. It was about curiosity. And I had finally seen something I couldn't unsee. You can't be curious about the void. Not when you've seen it open a door in the drywall and invite someone in. It's been 6 months. I live in a different city, under a different name. I work a cash-in-hand job at a lumber yard. I like it. The work is physical, it's heavy, it's solid. But the scars aren't gone, they're just quieter. I can't sleep in a room with the lights off, not because I'm afraid of the dark, but because I'm afraid of the flatness. In the dark, every wall is just a space, an absence. I have to see the corners. I have to see the seams where the walls meet the floor. I need to know they are still there. I have a new rule. I don't touch walls. Not if I can help it. I open doors with my elbow. I lean against door frames, but never the wall itself. At the lumber yard, I stack pallets of wood, but I will not rest my hand on the plasterboard of the warehouse. My co-workers think I'm eccentric, a germaphobe. I let them. The mental scar is the loop, the 37 seconds. I don't have the video anymore, but I don't need it. It plays in my head. Kabil stops. He turns. The static. The pop as the audio cuts. And then, the empty hallway. Sometimes I wake up sweating, my heart pounding, having dreamed that I was Kabil, that I heard the sound he heard. What was it? A voice? A song? A simple click? What sound does a lock make when it's opening in a place where no door exists? The worst part is the paranoia. I'll be in a crowd, in a supermarket aisle, and I'll feel it, a sudden drop in pressure, a stillness. The air goes dead, and I'm convinced that if I turn my head, the person walking next to me will just vanish, that the feed will stutter. The world feels thin. Now, it feels like a stage set. I keep expecting to find the edge. I keep expecting to put my hand through the plaster. I didn't survive. Not really. Surviving implies you fought something. It implies you won, or at least that you were the one who got away. I didn't win. I wasn't even playing. I was just watching the tape. The entity, the thing in that hotel, never even looked at me. It did what it did, and I was just an insect on the wall of the room where it happened. I didn't get away. I ran. There is a profound difference. Getting away means you escaped its grasp. Running means you just fled the area before it decided to notice you. I live every day with the knowledge that I survived by sheer dumb luck. I survived because I was in the security room and not in the 14th floor corridor. I survived because the entity was busy or full or whatever it is that it gets from collecting people. I am not a survivor. I am a witness. And a witness is just a victim who hasn't been called to the stand yet. I feel like I'm in a waiting room. I sit in my small apartment, surrounded by solid wooden furniture, and I wait. I wait for the day I'm standing in my kitchen, and the air goes still. I wait to hear that faint, inviting click from the middle of my living room wall. I didn't escape it. I just escaped the building. And the terrifying final truth is that walls are everywhere. Celeste didn't just run. She detonated. She burst from the building's lobby doors with a scream trapped so deep in her chest it made no sound, collapsing onto the rain-slick pavement of the street. The humid night air, thick with the smell of ozone and wet asphalt, felt like a physical slap, shocking her lungs back into operation. She scrambled to her feet, hands bleeding from the impact, and staggered into the center of the empty street, spinning around to look back. The suite was dark. The tower, a monolithic spike of glass and steel, pierced the low-hanging clouds. From this distance, it was just a building, silent, inert. She saw them, or thought she did, not in the window of the suite she'd fled. That was too high up, but in the reflective glass of the lobby. For a fraction of a second, framed in the polished chrome of the entrance, she saw 7 shadows standing shoulder to shoulder, and beside them, smaller, a splash of crimson. They weren't moving, they were just watching. She backed away, tripping over a curb, and fled into the relative safety of the city's neon-lit arteries, not stopping until she was miles away, huddled in the synthetic, overlit brightness of a 24-hour cafe. Her mind was a fractured mirror, replaying the images in a disorienting loop. The 7 figures, their movements so fluid and repetitive, the blackout, the suffocating red glow, the hand. She wasn't insane. She knew what she had seen, but she didn't know why. With hands that still trembled violently, spilling coffee onto the table, she pulled out her laptop. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, penetrating dread. She didn't type in ghosts or haunting. She typed the building's name and the only other word that mattered, history. Most of the results were glossy architectural reviews and lifestyle articles. But buried 4 pages deep was a link to a digitized newspaper archive, a long-form investigative piece from a local journalist, dated over 30 years ago. The journalist's name was Peter Lim. She found him. It took 2 hours, a dozen phone calls to old newspaper morgues and publishing houses. But she found him. He was no longer a journalist. He was an architectural historian, a semi-retired academic. When she finally reached him, his voice was thin and reedy. "The Orchid Tower, Suite 28B, he'd repeated, a strange, dead pause filling the line. "Meet me, now, at the old reference library on Victoria Street. Do not go back to your hotel. Do not go home." The library's archival room was cold, smelling of dust and acidic paper preservation. Peter Lim was a small man in a neatly pressed shirt, his face a roadmap of deep wrinkles. He didn't waste time with introductions. He had a large, leather-bound scrapbook open on the table. "You saw them, didn't you?" he said. Not as a question, but a statement. Celeste could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. "The family," he said, tapping a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Tragedy at Luxury Complex, 7 dead in Mystery Inferno." "It was never a mystery," Lim said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It was a cover-up. Before the Orchid Tower existed, there was another building on that land, an older, smaller, but equally exclusive apartment block, 35 years ago. The entire top floor burned. A man, his wife, his 2 children, and 3 of their live-in staff, 7 people. They were trapped in the master suite." He turned the page. A grainy, black and white photo showed the building's burnt-out husk. The official report cited faulty wiring. Lim continued, his finger tracing the edge of the photograph. "But it wasn't. It was arson." The fire was set deliberately, blocking the only stairwell and the elevator shaft. The fire department's report, the one that was buried, showed the fire started in 2 places at once. The family was trapped. They died in the central hallway of the suite, trying to break down the main door. "The 7 figures," Celeste whispered, the image of their panicked, silent loop flashing in her mind. "They're replaying it." "Precisely," Lim nodded. "A residual haunting, a psychic stain. The sheer terror and trauma of their final moments were so intense, they imprinted on the very location. A memory replay. They aren't even ghosts, not really. They're just an echo, trapped in a loop. They're harmless, but they're not," Celeste said, her voice shaking. "There's something else. A boy." Lim's eyes, previously just tired and academic, snapped to hers. They were sharp, and suddenly, they were afraid. "What boy?" "He was wearing a red shirt, holding a cat, a dead cat. He looked at me. His eyes, black." Lim finished for her. "They were all black." Celeste recoiled. How do you know?" "Because he was the faulty wiring," Lim said, flipping to the back of the scrapbook. He pulled out a smaller, more crumpled article. It wasn't from a major paper, but a local, defunct tabloid. The headline was sensational. "Firestarter's ghost. Neighbours claim to see red boy." "The police had a suspect," Lim explained. "A local boy, no older than 12. He was troubled, deeply disturbed. He was obsessed with the rich family that lived in the penthouse. They said the family's son had bullied him, had even, well, the story goes, the son killed the boy's pet cat. Celeste's blood ran cold. The boy in red, holding a dead cat. The boy was a known pyromaniac, Lim said. He'd been caught setting small fires in the neighborhood. He was seen, on the night of the fire, near the apartment block, wearing his favorite bright red t-shirt. But they never caught him. They never found him. He got away? Celeste asked. No, Lim said, shaking his head. That's the part the main papers wouldn't touch. The police theory was that he set the fire and fled. But the local legend, the story the other residents told, was that the boy never left. They say he stayed in the stairwell to watch. He was so consumed by his own rage and his desire for revenge that he misjudged the fire. The backdraft caught him. They believe he was consumed by the very fire he started. He died, too, not in panic, like the family, but in hate. All earlier clues now make sense. The cafe, the archive room, all of it dissolved. Celeste was back in the suite. The pieces of the night slammed into place, forming a coherent, terrifying whole. The loop, Celeste said, thinking aloud. I saw the 7 figures first. They were just walking, over and over, scared. It was sad. But then he appeared, Lim said. Yes, the memory replay stopped, the power went out, and the light. It wasn't the emergency lights, it was red. A deep, awful red, like embers. He brings the fire with him, Lim whispered. The residual haunting is just a memory of the event. But he is an intelligent, malevolent entity. He is the source of the event. He's not trapped in the loop. He controls it. The 7 figures are his puppets. I heard a sound, Celeste said, her hands clenching. When the lights went out, a dragging sound, slow, heavy, on the carpet. Lim looked ill. The family. They didn't die quickly. The smoke, the heat. In their final moments, they wouldn't have been walking. They would have been crawling, dragging themselves. He's not just replaying the loop, he's directing it, forcing them to relive the worst parts. For you, he was putting on a show. And the hand, Celeste's voice cracked. When I ran, I got out of the suite, I slammed the door, I looked back at the glass panel next to the door, and a hand, a small hand, pressed against it, from the inside. The inside of the suite? Lim asked. No, Celeste choked out. The inside of the glass. It was in the glass. It wasn't a reflection. It was between the panes. And then, it dragged. Peter Lim stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. He was pale. Oh, God. It's worse than I thought. When they built the Orchid Tower, they did it fast. They tore down the old structure, but they built on the same foundation, on the ashes. They didn't cleanse it. They trapped it all, the residual energy of the victims and the concentrated, hateful spirit of the boy. He grabbed Celeste by the shoulders, his grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me. What you saw was the point of no return. You weren't just a random guest. He chose you. The 7 figures are the echo. The boy is the voice. He has anchored himself to the new building. He's not in Suite 28B. He is Suite 28B. He's in the wiring, the plumbing, the glass. And when he made direct eye contact, when he showed you his black eyes, he wasn't just scaring you. Lim's voice dropped to a terrified, final whisper. He was attaching himself. He's not finished with you. You've seen his story. And now, he wants to show you how it ends. What do you think? Is walking away a form of defeat? Or was it the only sane choice? Celeste and Sarah Lamb didn't vanquish the entity. They simply resigned. The office, open for only 10 months, closed its doors for good. This story touches on a concept found in many spiritual beliefs, particularly in Asia, the idea that spaces remember. What if strong emotions, especially fear, can linger in a location long after the people are gone? The haunting might not be an aggressive entity, but rather a psychic echo, an imprint of trauma left on the very walls. If that's the case, you can't fight an echo, you can only stop listening. This is the quiet exorcism we see in the end. It's not a dramatic confrontation with bells and rituals. It is the simple, human act of acceptance and removal. You don't cleanse the space, you cleanse yourself from the space. Sometimes, the only victory is to choose your own peace and simply leave. Have you ever felt that lingering energy in a room? A place that just felt wrong? Let me know your own theories and experiences in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next terrifying tale.